let's hit the snack bar and eat something yummy.
This episode of Adventure Time sure existed. Unless, humanity as a whole had a fever dream that generated into a full-fledged night terror, and there was screaming and yelling and confusion and bafflement everywhere in the planet, which would explain a lot. But I think it's safe to assume that food chain did actually happen, and it was a non-canon episode of Adventure Time. What's there to talk about this episode? I mean, seriously. Sure, the animation is unique. If there's one thing I appreciate, or at least I respect about Adventure Time, is its own way in which it deals with growth. The growth of the show itself, and subsequently the growth of its main character, along with the subsequent growth of its intended audience. It is pretty damn obvious to see how far the show went compared to its initial routes. I mean, season 1 it was juvenile and nonsensical for the most part. But now it escalated into something more somber and quieter and mature. It lost the charm and, well, not the charm, it lost the childlike bodaciousness, mathematical radicality of the original show, because it's grown up. The main character has grown up. He's now dealing with very much adult problems, and he's more disillusioned, less childlike. In a most recent episode, he basically turned into Michael Fassbinder from the movie Shame, and ended up losing his virginity with Lumpy Space Princess. It's not the same show anymore. In fact, I don't think it even qualifies anymore as a kids show, if it ever was one to begin with. It somehow lost trace of its roots, while still being very recognizably what it is. On a fundamental level, I mean, same characters, same settings, but the tone has shifted so thoroughly compared to what it initially was. It's almost unbelievable. It's almost what's the word I'm looking for? Inconceivable for a modern day show, let alone a modern day cartoon that's broadcast on Cartoon Network. It consistently loses consistency. It becomes something completely different as it grows up. And really, at the end of the day, that's most likely what it means growing up. Change. And sometimes change is not all positive. In fact, most of the things happening right now in the show are quite creepy and also baffling, but for other reasons. So, like I said, the show as it is now is a more somber, more adult, less fantastic experience. So imagine my surprise when they actually pop out this episode completely out of nowhere, and it's colorful, unbridled, wild, animated nonsense once more. Except it's a little more scary. You can tell this animation was going to be something completely different from the rest by the very first few seconds in which the animation is showcased, in which those candy kids climb into the giant bird attraction that is supposed to be a metaphor, literal metaphor for the circle of life and the food chain and what have you, and the animation looks very pretty, but also very disorienting. And it gets worse. It gets more disorienting and baffling. It takes you completely aback as the episode goes on, because so the basic premise that the Finn and Jake think that the food chain is bunch of bollocks, and then the magic man comes out of nowhere and turns them into the food chain. They turn into birds that gets eaten by bigger birds. Then he uses his magic once again and turns them into the predator that hate them as a prey. And then the big predator dies and gets eaten by the bacteria, and they become the bacteria, and then they become flowers, and then they become the caterpillars that ate flowers, and become birds again, and so on and on and on. It's the food chain, or the circle of life, Kimba, whatever. You know, actually my favorite moment in the episode is when the magic man does his little hand wave magic like this. You know what I mean? The moment in which he does the hand wave thingy, and there's a shifty magic, and this trippy psychedelic voyage of apparent nonsense reaches all new heights of animated unbridledness, so to speak. There is really not much to say about the episode itself. It's something more that happens most likely for the sake of happening, and it's more of an excuse to showcase the animation of a really talented foreign artist. And once I saw who that artist was, let's just say that it explained everything. So now let's talk about this artist, shall we? I couldn't remember the name, so I actually wrote it here. Take a note. I'm taking notes. I know it's not really professional to do in front of a camera, but bear with me, this is just a lowly vlog. So the name of the artist is Masaki Ueda. Yes, he's a Japanese animator, and he worked on a interesting variety of shows and anime in Japan, such as Crayon Shin-chan. You probably know Crayon Shin-chan is relatively popular amongst anime fans, and it does look quite unique for an anime. And then he also worked at My Neighbors the Yamada, you know, the only Studio Ghibli film that looks completely different from any other Studio Ghibli film ever made. Yes, that one. He worked at that one as an animator. He also worked at an episode of Samurai Champloo, and also a special episode of the European French animated series Wakfu, the special episode being about Noxymilien. And I've seen it. You should watch it too. The entire show, that is, and then the special episode, which is animated in a way that's completely different from the show itself. But, so he did a lot of stuff, but I'd say that most notably, the reason why when I saw this episode, this food chain episode of Adventure Time, I was reminded of something I already saw, but I couldn't quite put the finger on it. It's because of... Okay, here's what actually reminded me. And yes, Masaki Yoda actually worked on this thing that it reminded me of. Let's get to the chase. Has any of you ever heard of a film known as Cat Soup? To this day, Cat Soup remains one of the most unique and frankly terrifying experiences of my cinematic viewing career. I mean, it doesn't really make much sense from a narrative standpoint. It might be an allegory of something, but it's most likely not. It's most likely something more of an excuse to showcase a very unique style of animation that doesn't really follow any traditional means. And I respect that. I respect that the animation in this film is, frankly, completely, totally different from anything else you might come across to, as far as anime are concerned, because it doesn't really look like anime, if you have in mind the stereotypical way anime look like. Cat Soup, by the way, he was the animation producer of this film, and he also co-wrote the script. So he's basically responsible for the nonsensical plot and the way it looks. And again, that's why it makes sense that Food Chain would be that apparent lack of cohesive storytelling it would show in that episode of Adventure Time. So Cat Soup, how to describe Cat Soup? Because why not to talk about it since we're here? Because there isn't much else to talk about Food Chain, really, other than being impressed about it. Cat Soup... Okay, it's based off a popular strip comic series by a guy named Nekojiro, which is not a clever name in the slightest. Neko meaning cat, so you see why I said that. And it was a particularly cynical, mean-spirited satire on, I believe, the consumer society. It's a world in which all the anthropomorphic animals are sentient beings, but that's still doesn't prevent them to eat each other. So typical cattle animals such as pigs still get eaten as they were pigs, but you can still entertain interesting conversations with them before killing them and eating them. It really puts the whole you know, status quo of the food chain. See what I did there? Into question, and really, I don't think it's a very good satire to begin with. In fact, it's not even funny. It's really kind of horrible, in fact, how mean-spirited it is. But the film itself, Cat Soup, doesn't really have anything to do with that. It's a relatively short film, although not as short as I would want it to be, really. It's a bit too long. It's completely without dialogues. And whatever kind of story it tries to tell, it's all communed through very wild and unbridled but highly inconsistent animation, which is pretty to look at, but also baffling and downright terrifying at times. So, yes, returning to Food Chain. I'd say that Food Chain is a perfect introduction to the art of Masaaki Yuada. So, if you actually like that kind of animation, uncomplicated narrative that only serves to showcase British animation, which is really unique, by the way, then Masaaki Yuada is the kind of artist you want to know better and to seek out properly. If you're not, well, this was just one non-canon episode you can ignore and go back to the appointed storyline for Adventure Time by the following episode. Whatever this grand narrative of Adventure Time may ultimately end up to be, because that is also quite confusing and annoying but for completely different reasons that shall eventually explain in some other vlog, or maybe not if I feel like it. But yes, Masaaki Yuada, Food Chain is a perfect introduction to this artist for a mainstream audience. I really like this aspect of Adventure Time. It sits in a position so comfortable in today's mainstream TV animation that it can pretty much be whatever it wants to be. It can pretty much give complete liberty to both animators and writers to do whatever they want to do, because it is such a cultural and important phenomenon nowadays that it has basically absolute liberty of action. That is something completely unheard of. Usually shows so bold in their presentation don't last very long. And if they end up lasting very long, they become basically corrupted and a parody of their former selves, or a creepypasta, like SpongeBob. We are very lucky to live in an age in which there are cartoons such as Adventure Time, My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic, even regular show, really. So, yes, I say this is a great period to enjoy cartoons. So, again, Masaaki Yuada, he made Cat Soup. Seek it out. Or don't. In fact, you'll probably live longer if you don't see that film. But if you're curious, it's not difficult to find online. Okay, so this wasn't a very informative or particularly profound vlog. In fact, I didn't really say anything about either things I talk about. But, I guess it'll do. Food Chain. It existed.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
Hey, have you noticed we are birds now?